Armaldo is known as perhaps the worst fossil Pokemon in the franchise. With its horrible bug rock defensive typing, weakness to stealth rock, low speed, and very little to offer overall, Armaldo consistently ranks in the lowest tiers of competitive singles. But that wasn't true in its debut game. Back in Generation 3, Armaldo was ranked in the respectable UUBL tier, and was surprisingly viable in OU. In the modern Gen 3 metagame, you do see the occasional Armaldo in high-level tournament play, and this Pokemon has a lot of really unique qualities that give it niche value on specific teams. But Armaldo could have been so much better, if not for a single fatal flaw. This Pokemon was so close to greatness, but it fell just short. Let's take a look at the tragedy and triumph of Armaldo in Gen 3 OU. But first, don't forget to tune in to my next episode of the Fridge podcast, where I will be interviewing one of my favorite fellow YouTubers, Big Yellow. Subscribe to the Fridge channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss this one. If you have any questions for Big Yellow, you can leave them down below. Thank you. While in later generations a bug rock typing is horrible defensively, in Gen 3 it's not so bad. Stealth rock doesn't exist yet in Gen 3, so that isn't a concern. Immunity to Sandstorm is very valuable, and bug typing actually complements rock quite well, cancelling out weaknesses to ground, fighting, and grass, which are very significant. Armaldo has 3 weaknesses to rock, steel, and water. These are common types, but Armaldo can still operate defensively pretty well, all things considered. With serviceable defensive stats by Gen 3 standards, Armaldo is not quite as tragic defensively as it becomes later in the franchise, and Armaldo can operate as a rather threatening bulky attacker, with 2 really nice stab types, and a very good base 125 attack stat. Armaldo also has a very blessed move pool, with 2 of the most coveted utility options in all of Gen 3, Knockoff and Rapid Spin. The only other Pokemon with access to both of these moves is Kabutops, who is not as well suited to a defensive utility role. Just having access to both of these options and being pretty solid on top of that should make Armaldo a straight up OU Pokemon, right? Well, there's a catch. Unfortunately, it is impossible for an Armaldo to learn both Knockoff and Rapid Spin on the same set, since this egg move combination is not compatible. Armaldo has to choose between one of these options only. It can't have both. This is the tragedy of Armaldo. If it could get both of these important moves on the same set, it would be a fantastic all-in-one utility Pokemon, and I think it would be ranked in OU. I would be very curious to see the reality where Armaldo has both of these tools, and the effect that would have on the metagame. But we don't live in that universe, and Armaldo must accept the cards it was dealt. Despite this unfortunate quirk, Armaldo is still a desirable Pokemon on the right teams. By far the most popular choice between these 2 utility options is Knockoff. Rapid Spin is great too, but Knockoff is much more scarce, and Armaldo is significantly better than most other knockoff users in the game. Knocking off an enemy's item is a guaranteed way to cripple them for the remainder of the game. It can't be stopped by effects like Taunt or abilities like Natural Cure. Nothing likes to switch in against Knockoff. Nothing is immune. And there is some serious value to that. By far the most popular user of Knockoff in the game is Hariyama, who has fantastic bulk, a mono fighting typing which is useful against Tyranitar, and solid attacking stats on top of that. Armaldo does have some advantages over Hariyama though. Sand immunity is a big deal, and allows Armaldo to heal with leftovers. Hariyama can threaten Snorlax offensively, but switching in against Snorlax is rough. Armaldo, on the other hand, has the perfect typing to completely counter Snorlax. Armaldo resists normal and is neutral to the common ground and fighting coverage used by Snorlax. Armaldo is the best and safest Snorlax switch-in in the entire game, which is a really valuable quality. Snorlax can be a tough matchup for the defensive teams who get broken through by curse boosts or the general breaking power of a Snorlax. Armaldo patches this up nicely, and Knockoff is a perfect way to capitalize on these defensive switches. Removing items from the enemy is really valuable on slower paced teams. If you want to ruin Snorlax's life even further, you can run Harden or Mimic on Armaldo. Harden will raise your defense by 1 stage to match Snorlax's curse attack boosts. This way they can never break through your Armaldo with boosts. Mimic can copy curse from them as an alternative way to match their boosts, and has the added benefit of being able to copy more useful enemy moves like spikes from a Skarmory. You may think this is an unsafe way to go because of crit chance. Critical hits will completely ignore defensive boosts, so if the Snorlax gets a crit, which has a higher chance of happening over many turns, Armaldo will still faint. But Armaldo has the useful ability Battle Armor, granting a complete immunity to critical hits. With just knockoff and seismic toss, you can 1v1 Snorlax easily. Snorlax is among the Pokemon most punished by losing its leftovers. Armaldo is also quite useful against enemy Celebi, especially more passive variants. Bug-type Stab greatly threatens Celebi with its ×4 bug weakness. You are vulnerable to stab damage from Psychic against more offensive Celebi sets, but it's still very useful to be able to threaten Celebi directly. Armaldo is also naturally bulky enough to operate well against a variety of common defensive Pokemon like Blissey and Skarmory. You do risk getting yourself statused by these Pokemon, but that's a small price to pay if you can land a knockoff on these crucial defensive pieces. Armaldo can also act as a decent breaker, with its high attack and access to Swords Dance. Rock Blast is sometimes used on Armaldo for its multi-hit effect, which can break substitutes against foes like Zapdos, and for its random chance to deal higher damage than usual. Armaldo has a solid physical move pool too, with access to Rock Slide and Earthquake. If you choose Rapid Spin on Armaldo, there is a lot more competition. Donphan is superior as a sand immune defensive rapid spinner with a ground typing. Claydol and Starmie are also generally easier to fit on teams most of the time. But Armaldo's advantages against enemies like Snorlax and Celebi make it worth considering as a rapid spinner on some teams. There's also some good surprise value to this set. Most opponents will assume the Armaldo has knockoff, and a surprise rapid spin, especially if the enemy's spike setter has been eliminated, can be game winning. One of Gen 3's greatest players, McMagan, used this Armaldo team in semi-finals of ADV Revival against the player Humyum. Armaldo's assistance against Snorlax is greatly appreciated here, since Skarmory can't always be a reliable wall if it gets trapped by Magneton. Armaldo also supports both of the team's win conditions, Dragon Dance Gyarados and Dragon Dance Tyranitar. These Pokemon are checked and walled by enemies such as Skarmory, Swampert, and bulky water types like Melodic or Suicune. Armaldo invites in all of these Pokemon and can knock off their leftovers, significantly reducing their longevity and allowing them to be broken through more easily. Against Humyum's team, which did have a Magneton and a Snorlax, Armaldo was a great choice. Funnily enough, the player ABR, another legend of Gen 3OU, also brought Armaldo against Humyum in the same tournament, and Humyum, once again, brought a Magneton and a Snorlax. Two top players arriving at the same solution against an opponent who commonly uses Snorlax is a great example of Armaldo's niche value in Gen 3OU. Overall, I am a big Armaldo fan. I love what this Pokemon adds to the format, even if its usage is rather low and it's pretty rarely seen. This Pokemon has a great selection of options and is an amazing tool for creative team builders. Knockoff is a scarce option for good reason, and if it was on something like Swampert or Blissey that is really powerful defensively, it would start to become frustrating very quickly. I really like the fact that Knockoff is only on Pokemon like Hariyama and Armaldo, who are decent defensively, but also have a lot of exploitable flaws, making Knockoff feel less overpowered as an option. The surprising viability of Armaldo is a great example of how the lower power level of Gen 3OU can amplify niche Pokemon. A bug rock typing just doesn't work defensively in later generations. Shuckle is alright sometimes, but that's mostly because it has sturdy and a lot of good hazards to click. But in Gen 3, even a typing like bug rock has its value. Unique traits are worth something in this format. Despite not being able to use knockoff and rapid spin on the same set, Armaldo has triumphed, managing to create a little home for itself in Gen 3OU.